Our political landscape needs to change to include more women. And if it did, we would all be better off. What do these 4 women have in common? It's unlikely that they've ever met, and yet their stories about how they solved 2 very different problems on different sides of the Atlantic can teach us much about the possibilities of our politics if we have the courage to change it. Last October, the US government came to a standstill. Government buildings, websites, parks, tourist sites were closed for more than 2 weeks. Over 700,000 government employees were forced to take unpaid leave. Within a week, the government would run out of cash to pay its bills. The majority Republican Senate was holding US President Barack Obama to ransom. Unless he made concessions on his prized healthcare bill, they would not vote for a budget that would let him keep the country running. Deeply frustrated with this situation, Senator Susan Collins, a Republican from Maine, drafted a plan that she thought both parties could live with. Female colleagues joined her, a handful of them, Democrats and Republicans, and together the group progressed a framework that ultimately became the centrepiece of a deal to get the country up and running. Their work ended the deadlock. In Sweden in the late 1990s, women's rights organisations and female politicians got together to develop a law to protect women from prostitution and human trafficking, just like in so many other countries. But what Sweden did was different. Their law, passed through a parliament with a majority of 43% women, punishes the user of the service, not the provider. In Sweden, by buying sex, one risks a court appearance, a fine, and a public naming and shaming. The result? A reduction in prostitution, a curbing of sex trafficking, and a shift in the social shame associated with transactional sex, away from women, usually the vulnerable provider, and onto men, the purchaser. What these 2 stories have in common is that they illustrate how our political landscape can change if we bring more women into it, and why I believe that is so important. But right now, here in Ireland, we are so far from achieving that. In fact, we have a very serious problem. Our Dáil, the heart of our national political representation, has just 27 women of 126 TDs. That is 16%, and that is the highest number of women that we have ever had in our national parliament. In fact, just 95 women have ever been elected to the Dáil in its history. And of those 95, just 14 have held ministerial positions at Cabinet. Locally, our situation is not much better. It improved in May, but still just 21% of our city and county councillors are female. And these figures combine to give a pretty dismal global picture. Ireland ranks 96th of 188 countries around the world, behind countries like Libya, North Korea, and Tajikistan, and just ahead of Chad and Azerbaijan. What these figures tell us is that when decisions are made in Ireland, in our towns, in our villages, in our cities, and in our country, women are absent. But why? Are women choosing not to be at the table? Or is there something more? Are they being excluded? Research in Ireland and internationally looks at this, and it shows that yes, there are particular barriers that women face to entering politics. Our political culture is male-dominated, and of course it is. Our political institutions have always been more or less 85% male. So this means in practice that things are done in a way that suits men. When meetings are held, where they're held, how business is conducted, how decisions are made. And often this puts women off. For many, for example, a meeting in a country pub at 10 p.m. is neither convenient nor viewed as appropriate. And this cultural barrier feeds into the issue of candidate selection. Who chooses the political candidates? This has usually been done by men and traditionally has favoured men. Cash is a barrier to anybody who wants to enter politics. But traditionally, men in Ireland have had more access to cash and to the networks through which they could raise cash. For women, raising the money to run a political campaign was more difficult. This is changing slowly, but cash remains a barrier to women looking to enter politics, as is childcare. In the majority of Irish households, women hold this responsibility, and naturally, it affects their ability to attend political meetings, to go canvassing, and in the role that they would have as an elected representative. And finally, confidence. Women are much more likely than men to say that they are not confident to run for politics. Since 2008, with my partner Michelle, we have travelled up and down the country meeting thousands of women. We have met businesswomen, community activists, women in trade unions, charity leaders, women who work in the home, you name it, students, so many women. But no matter what the group or who the individual woman, when asked, would you consider politics, would you put yourself forward, the answer is almost always the same. Sure, I couldn't do that. I'm not qualified. And it's not just in Ireland. A survey of several thousand potential political candidates in the US found that men were 60% more likely to say that they were very qualified to run for political office. And Professor Jennifer Lawless, who undertook this research at Washington University, illustrates it with an anecdote. She tells a story about calling a woman as part of the research. This woman had vast political experience. She had worked in the mayor's office and run a number of successful political campaigns. Jennifer asked her, "Have you ever been approached to run for politics?" "No," she said, "I haven't." Jennifer was surprised, so she probed a little. "Has nobody told you that you're good at your job and you should maybe consider a further step?" "Oh, that," she said. "Well, yes, in fact, the mayor said to me that I have really strong political acumen and I should think about how I use it." "There you are," Jennifer explained. "That was him encouraging you to consider going forward, to making that next step." Next, she called a man with less political credentials than the previous woman and said, "Have you ever been approached to run for politics?" "I have," he said. "In fact, it was just last week. My flight was delayed and I was in an airport bar. I was having a beer and CNN was on TV. They were talking politics. I was commenting, and as it continued, I grew more and more irate. I couldn't believe what they were saying. After a short time, the guy sitting next to me turned and said, 'Wow, you really know your stuff. You should go into politics.'" This is a story, a simple story, but it illustrates something more serious. Women want to know that they're qualified to go forward for politics. They want to be absolutely sure that they have the skills and experience to be a public representative. But that is impossible because there is no job description or person specification for a TD or for a local councillor. There's no clear model or obvious route for how to get there. And women, as we know from Jennifer Lawless's research, wait to be asked and need to be asked often multiple times before they put themselves forward. It's not usually something that they come up with on their own. And so it was those things that motivated myself and Michelle to set up Women for Election. These are perfectly surmountable barriers. And Women for Election is an organisation, a non-partisan organisation, to inspire and equip women to succeed in politics. Through training and mentoring, we support women to explore, develop and realise their political ambition. And our model works. At the local elections in May, 441 candidates were women. That's 22%. Of that 22%, 180 were participants on a Women for Election training programme, and of that 180, 94 were elected. That's 52%. Thank you. Now, 196 of our 949 councillors nationally are women. That is a 33% increase on the figure in 2009, and half of those women are Women for Election alumni. I am proud of what Women for Election achieved at the local elections. I am really proud, and of those women who put themselves forward. But we are still so far from achieving our goals. To make a real difference, the minimum requirement is a critical mass of 30%. That means 30% women, at least, in our Dáil, in our Seanad, and in every single city and county council chamber across our country. And we must get there, because if we do, so much will change. I use the stories at the beginning to give a flavour to you of the difference that balance in our politics can make. And those stories are backed up by evidence from around the world that shows the unique and valuable contribution that female politicians make. Women conduct politics in a different way to men. They are more open and transparent in their approach. This means they do simple things like put the minutes of their meetings on their websites, publish lists of the people that they've met, and invite groups from outside the traditional political circles into the centres of power. By doing this, by taking this approach, they bring politics closer to everyday people, to voters. Women are also more likely to take a bipartisan approach, to work cross-party to achieve a shared goal. I shared the example earlier of the group of Republican women reaching across the aisle to their Democratic counterparts to achieve a shared aim. This experience is replicated time and time again, nationally and internationally, when women are involved. Women also take a different policy focus to men. They're more likely to focus on education, health, and welfare issues. They're also more likely to look holistically at how policy affects families and children. This does not mean that women are not focused on economic issues, far from it, but rather that they marry a concern with those issues with a social and a family-focused agenda. And because women traditionally haven't had access to the traditional power networks around politics, those who have succeeded have had to build new and different coalitions and networks. And within those new coalitions and networks are different interests and voices, and they bring their priorities into the process. And what all this means, this combination of evidence and stories, is that women bring a different perspective to politics. And this is not about men versus women or what's better or worse. It's about the value of different perspectives around decision-making tables and how those perspectives bring challenge and discussion and ultimately lead to more robust decisions and better outcomes. So what now? What next? At the next election in Ireland, parties will be required by law to field a minimum of 30% female candidates or face losing half of their state funding. This has pushed political parties to act. All are declaring that they're open for business and they're actively seeking female candidates. Women for Election is already working with aspiring candidates and campaign managers. We want to build on our success last May to prove that when women run, women win. Our targets for the general election are that 25% of all candidates are women, and that 20% of all of our newly elected TDs are women. These seemingly modest goals are historic. They would mean a 25% increase in the female representation in our Dáil in just one election. They would also symbolise that Ireland is taking real and true steps towards building a balanced parliament. And if we get there, if we achieve that, we are starting to take the steps to building a diverse parliament where we can have those more robust and better decisions that benefit all of us, men, women, girls and boys. But what can we do in this room today, this evening, tomorrow to contribute to solving this problem? We know from Jennifer Lawless' research that women don't come up with the idea to run for politics on their own. They need to be asked. We all know somebody, a woman, that would be a fantastic politician. So I would say, ask her. And then, learning again from Professor Lawless, ask her again and again. Thank you.